And so, Kate, that pretty much sums up the Ertmer and Newby article that I found for our seminar. What about you? Did you find an article to support our discussion on how the way students organize knowledge affects their learning?
Yes, Marianne, I did. I found a fabulous literature review written by Patricia A. Alexander and Judith E. Judy. It's called The Interaction of Domain-Specific and Strategic Knowledge in Academic Performance, and it ties in so nicely with our topic.
That does sound interesting. Tell me about it. What exactly is meant by domain-specific and strategic knowledge?
Alexander and Judy define domain-specific knowledge as the declarative, procedural, or conditional knowledge one possesses relative to a particular field of study. Whereas strategies are goal-directed procedures that are planfully or intentionally evoked either prior to, during, or after the performance of a task. To simplify all that, domain knowledge refers to knowing what, knowing how, and understanding when and where to access particular facts or use certain procedures. Strategies are a specific type of procedural knowledge and support individuals in regulating, executing and evaluating their tasks. Alexander and Judy discuss two types of strategies. Task-limited strategies, such as mnemonics, are domain-specific. Across-domain strategies apply to more than one content area and can be broken down into two categories. Goal-limited strategies accomplish particular tasks. For example, making a list would be a goal-limited strategy. General strategies are those that can be used in more contexts. Consider a Bachelor of Science student at UOIT who is trying to solve a word problem for his chemistry assignment and isn't sure what to do. He takes time to think about the problem and then applies a strategy he had employed the previous semester in his physics course, and is able to complete the work successfully.
I see. So, what did Alexander and Judy discover about the interaction of domain-specific and strategic knowledge on academic performance?
Through their research, they were able to suggest a number of hypotheses, some related to the effects of prior knowledge on learning, and some related more to our study on the organization of knowledge. I'll just note the first few quickly but then elaborate more on those hypotheses that are more relevant to our topic of study. First of all, they suggest that a foundation of domain-specific knowledge seems requisite to the efficient and effective utilization of strategic knowledge. A learner really cannot effectively and appropriately apply strategic knowledge to a domain task unless that learner has some knowledge of the domain. Alexander and Judy also hypothesized that inaccurate or incomplete domain knowledge may inhibit or interfere with learning. The next hypothesis is that strategic knowledge contributes to the utilization and acquisition of domain-specific knowledge. If students don't have a rich repertoire of strategic knowledge from which they are able to draw, it is quite possible that the learner will simply accumulate knowledge limited to certain contexts. Students need to be taught to engage in elaborative interrogation during learning. They need to learn to question what is important about their new knowledge. And they also need to learn about factual relationships and then determine why those relations exist. When students employ strategic learning strategies, they increase their domain-specific knowledge. Another hypothesis put forth by Alexander and Judy proposes that the ill-informed or unintelligent use of strategies can be detrimental to learning. Research provides examples of cases in which students select inappropriate learning strategies. Successful problem solvers often spend more time thinking rather than doing. If a student does not fully understand a task, he or she might initiate a poor choice of strategic processes. Those choices can also negatively impact future learning. Another hypothesis states that strategic processing is altered as knowledge in a domain increases. Novice learners tend to rely on strategies which are not very efficient. At times, these learners have difficulty even knowing when they do understand new concepts. Novice learners will try to expand on what they know, rather than explore the areas they do not know. Expert learners are reflective thinkers, self-questioning to identify their areas of weakness. They take time to review tasks prior to initiating problem-solving strategies. Before they begin to engage in a solution, expert learners establish a context for the task. Expert learners use underlying principles and concepts to classify and categorize problems. Alexander and Judy state, and I quote, that the organization of knowledge, not necessarily its amount, may be the foundation of sorting tasks studies reported in the expert novice literature. The next hypothesis suggests that differences in the relative importance of domain-specific and strategic knowledge may be a consequence of the nature of the domain or the structure of the task to which they are applied. It is interesting to note that many of the studies referenced by Alexander and Judy found that formal coursework really did not make any difference in the ways in which novices applied problem-solving strategies. Alexander and Judy also noted some discrepancies in the findings of others. For example, in 1980, Newell suggested that general strategies tend to be weak but domain-specific strategies tend to be strong. However, Alexander and Judy propose that, and I quote again, "The strength of a strategy may lie in its appropriateness to the task. A strategy that is weak in one domain or task may be powerful in another." The seventh hypothesis states that perceiving the relatedness in domain and strategic knowledge across tasks and across domains seems to characterize competent performance. The more knowledge learners acquire, the better able they are to mentally represent a problem. Knowledgeable learners categorize problems based on their underlying structures. Their performance is guided by finding the relationships between what initially appeared to be diverse tasks. Learners do well when they are able to draw connections between their life experiences and the academic tasks they are performing. And, finally, the last hypothesis outlined by Alexander and Judy states that motivational and social contextual factors may impact the acquisition and utilization of domain-specific and strategic knowledge. This section of the paper is more applicable to the third chapter of our text. Alexander and Judy note that evidence indicates that motivational and social contextual factors play a part in the relationship between domain-specific and strategic knowledge. Students demonstrate a greater degree of success when they are invigorated by a challenge, when they are self-confident even when confronted by errors, and when they are interested in the subject matter. Students are also positively impacted by teacher motivation.
What a lot of great information. There is a difference between knowing and knowing how. I'm clear now on how the interaction between domain-specific and strategic knowledge is impacted by a learner's knowledge organization. I'd love to read this article myself. Would you provide the reference, please?
Absolutely. And I'd also like to point out that the bulk of the information I outlined comes from pages 384 through 397.